What would you do if the richest white man in the city looked a black father in the eye and said he had been waiting for him because he was the only man worthy of raising his daughter?
The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the city's polished streets into rivers of light. Outside the gleaming glass tower of the city's most exclusive private hospital, a black man stood motionless beneath the awning, water streaming from the brim of his worn cap. His name was Marcus Reed. He was 34 years old, though the lines carved into his dark, weathered face and the hollows beneath his eyes made him look older. In his hands he clutched a faded manila folder, its edges softened by a decade of being opened and closed in shelters, bus stations, and the cabs of pickup trucks after long shifts. Security guards in crisp uniforms approached him twice. The first time they told him to move along. The second time one of them put a hand on his shoulder. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I'm here for my daughter." Inside, on the top floor, in a suite that smelled of expensive flowers and antiseptic, Richard Hale lay against white pillows. 72 years old, a white man whose tech and crypto fortune once moved markets. The monitors beside his bed beeped softly, steady but slowing. A nurse leaned in and spoke quietly. Richard's eyes, still sharp in his pale, drawn face, opened. "Let him come up," he said. No one in that hallway understood what was about to happen. Not the guards, not the lawyers waiting in the lobby, not even Marcus, who had spent 10 years preparing for a fight he never expected to win. 10 years earlier, on another rainy night, Marcus had stood in a different hospital corridor. His wife, Elena, a black woman, had just given birth to their daughter. There had been complications, too much blood, too fast. Elena was gone before Marcus could say goodbye. And in the chaos that followed, someone in hospital scrubs had walked out with their newborn baby girl. The police called it a tragic misunderstanding at first. Then they called it a cold case. Marcus called it the day his life ended and another one began, the one where he became a ghost who refused to disappear. He had nothing left, no wife, no child, no answers, only a promise he made to a tiny hospital bracelet he still carried in his pocket. "I will find you. I will never stop." If stories like this move you, stories of quiet strength and dignity that the world often overlooks, I would be truly grateful if you subscribed. It took weeks to research and craft this story, and your support helps me keep creating them for you. For 10 years, Marcus Reed lived like a man walking through fog that never lifted. He took every job that paid cash and asked no questions. Construction sites where he hauled rebar until his dark palms split. Night shifts in warehouses where the cold bit through his thin gloves. Sometimes he slept in the back of a borrowed truck. Sometimes he slept on the floor of a church basement that let him stay when the shelters were full. He kept a small notebook in his back pocket. Every page was filled with names, dates, phone numbers, and dead ends. He crossed them out one by one, but he never tore the pages out. The crossed-out lines were proof he was still moving. Every morning he woke before the sun. If he was lucky enough to have a roof, he washed in a sink and shaved with a dull razor so he wouldn't look completely lost when he showed Amara's photo. He carried 2 pictures. One was the original hospital photo of Elena, a beautiful black woman, holding their hours-old daughter. The other was a sketch he had paid a street artist to draw, an age-progressed version of what she might look like now. A black girl with dark brown skin, serious dark eyes, and the same small, thoughtful mouth as her mother. He showed the photos to everyone, day laborers, bus drivers, waitresses working the overnight shift. Most people looked once, shook their heads, and moved on. A few looked twice. Those were the ones who sometimes gave him a lead that cost him bus fare he didn't have. He never drank, not once. He had seen what the bottle did to men who had lost everything. He needed his mind sharp. He needed to remember the sound of Elena's laugh and the exact weight of his daughter in his arms for those few minutes before the world took her. People told him to stop. A caseworker, a pastor, an old friend from before. "You're destroying yourself," they said. "Have another child. Start over." Marcus never argued. He simply folded the photos, put them back in the folder, and kept walking. because starting over would have meant admitting that the little black girl who had his eyes and Elena's chin was gone forever, and that was the one lie he refused to tell himself. Some nights, when the rain sounded like the hospital that terrible evening, he would sit on the edge of whatever bed or bench he had found and talk to her out loud. "I don't know what they told you about your daddy, but I'm still here. I'm still looking. And when I find you, I'm going to tell you every story about your mama that I can remember." That was the weight he carried, not just the grief, the responsibility of being the only person on earth who still said her name like a prayer instead of a memory.
The night it almost ended was a Tuesday in early spring. Marcus had followed a lead to a small town 3 hours away. A woman who worked in hospital records claimed she remembered a private adoption that matched the details. Marcus spent the last of his savings on a bus ticket and a cheap motel room. When he arrived, the records office told him the file had been sealed by court order. The woman who had given him the tip wouldn't meet his eyes when he asked why she had sent him on a 3-hour journey for nothing. He walked back to the bus station in the dark. Halfway there, the rain started again. He found a covered bench and sat down, the folder on his lap growing heavier with every drop. For the first time in 10 years, he let himself say the words out loud. Maybe she's better off. The thought tasted like poison, but it was there. Richard Hale was a wealthy white man who could give a black child everything: safety, education, a future without hunger or fear. Marcus had nothing but calloused hands and a heart that had been breaking for a decade. He pulled out the hospital bracelet he still carried. The plastic was cracked now. He ran his thumb over the faded name, Baby Girl Reed. He closed his eyes and saw Elena's face the way it had been in those last minutes, scared but trusting him to protect their daughter. A sound broke through the rain. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, was crying because she had dropped her ice cream. Her father knelt in a puddle without hesitation, scooped her up, and promised they would get another one. Marcus watched them walk away under the father's jacket, the child's head tucked against his shoulder. Something inside Marcus cracked open. He bent forward on the bench, the folder pressed to his chest, and let the sobs come. He didn't make a sound. He had learned long ago how to cry without anyone noticing. But the tears came anyway, hot and relentless, mixing with the rain on his dark face. He stayed there until the buses stopped running. Then he walked the 3 hours back to the city in the dark, because even on the night he almost gave up, some part of him still refused to stop moving toward her. 3 weeks later, a different kind of rain was falling, soft, almost gentle. Marcus was sitting in the back corner of a public library, using the free computer. He wasn't searching missing persons databases anymore. He was looking at old society pages from the newspaper, because someone had once told him that rich people sometimes appeared in photos when they adopted. And there it was, a small article from 4 months earlier. Richard Hale, the reclusive white tech investor, had quietly adopted a 10-year-old black girl through private channels. The photo showed a frail, elderly white man in a wheelchair and a small black girl with serious dark eyes standing beside him at what looked like a garden event. She wasn't smiling, but she was safe. She was fed. She was loved, at least by the man whose hand rested gently on her shoulder. Marcus stared at the screen until the librarian told him the library was closing. Then he walked outside and stood under the streetlight for a long time, the folder pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have money for a lawyer or a private investigator. All he had was the truth and 10 years of never looking away. That night he did something he hadn't done in years. He went to a laundromat that stayed open late and washed the cleanest clothes he owned. He shaved carefully. He stood in front of the cracked mirror and practiced speaking without anger in his voice. "My name is Marcus Reed. I'm her father. I just need to see her.
I just need to know she's okay. He didn't sleep. He walked the city instead, through neighborhoods he had searched 100 times, past the hospital where everything had been taken, and finally toward the one building he had never dared approach before. By the time the sun rose, Marcus Reed was standing outside Richard Hale's hospital, rain soaking through his jacket once again, the folder in his hands, and something new in his chest he hadn't felt in a decade. Hope, fragile and terrifying.
The years had trained Marcus in ways no school ever could. He had learned how to wait, how to stand outside buildings for hours without looking suspicious, how to read the micro-expressions of security guards, the slight shift in posture that meant they were about to call for backup, the softening around the eyes that meant they might listen for 30 seconds. He had learned how to speak to power without shrinking. Years of being turned away from offices and police stations had taught him that quiet dignity disarmed people faster than shouting ever could. Most importantly, he had learned what kind of father he wanted to be if he ever got the chance. There had been a man named Walter at a shelter 3 years earlier, an older guy who had lost his own kids to the system. One night, after Marcus had helped him carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs for a job that paid $20, Walter had said something Marcus never forgot. A real father doesn't just love the child he gets to keep. He fights for the one the world tried to steal, even when it costs him everything, especially then. Marcus had carried those words like another photo in his pocket. He had failed too many times to count. There was the time he spent 3 months' savings on a man who claimed to have information and disappeared with the money. The time he hitchhiked across 2 states only to find the girl in the photo was someone else's child. Each failure had carved something out of him. Not bitterness, something cleaner, a kind of clarity about what actually mattered. On the morning he walked toward the hospital, Marcus was not the same man who had stood in the rain 10 years earlier. That man had been broken and furious. This man was still carrying the same wound, but he had learned how to carry it without letting it crush everyone around him. He had learned that love, real love, sometimes looks like showing up even when you have no idea what you're going to say. He reached the hospital doors just after 9. The guards recognized him from the night before. One of them stepped forward, hand already rising to stop him. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply held up the folder and said the words he had practiced. "I'm here for my daughter." Something in his voice made the guard pause. The man spoke into his radio. There was a long silence. Then a voice on the other end said something Marcus couldn't hear. The guard stepped aside. "Top floor, suite 1201. They're expecting you." Marcus walked through the lobby with water still dripping from his jacket. He didn't look at the marble floors or the expensive art. He looked at the elevator doors and thought about Elena. He thought about the promise he had made to a plastic hospital bracelet. When the doors opened on the top floor, he stepped out into a hallway that smelled of money and medicine. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar. Marcus Reed took a breath that felt like the first real one in 10 years. Then he walked toward it.
The room was larger than any apartment Marcus had lived in during the last decade. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds. Machines hummed quietly. In the center of it all, propped up by pillows, was Richard Hale, an elderly white man whose pale skin looked almost translucent against the white sheets. The old man's skin was pale, almost translucent, but his eyes were alive. He studied Marcus for a long moment, the wet clothes clinging to his dark frame, the tired face, the folder clutched like a lifeline. Then Richard Hale smiled. "I've been waiting for you," he said quietly. Marcus froze in the doorway. He had prepared for anger, for lawyers, for security dragging him out. He had not prepared for this. Richard gestured to the chair beside the bed. "Come in, Marcus, please." Marcus walked forward on legs that suddenly felt unsteady. He placed the folder on the edge of the bed with hands that shook. Inside were the birth certificate, the hospital bracelet, the age-progressed sketch of the black girl with serious dark eyes, and copies of every police report he had collected over 10 years. Richard didn't open it. He already knew what was inside. "My investigators found you 6 months ago," Richard said. His voice was thin but steady. "I told them to watch, not to interfere. I wanted to see what kind of man you were when no one was looking." He paused, as if gathering strength. "I saw the jobs, the shelters, the way you never stopped asking, the way you helped other people even when you had nothing yourself. I saw a father who refused to let the world convince him his daughter was gone." Marcus's throat closed. He couldn't speak. Richard continued, "I could fight you. With my money and my lawyers, I could keep her. But I won't." He looked Marcus directly in the eyes. "I'm giving you everything. The companies, the properties, the accounts. It's already been transferred into a trust in your name. I had the papers signed 3 weeks ago." Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. Richard reached out a frail hand and rested it on the folder. "I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing this because I've seen what kind of father you are. Raise her, protect her, give her the life she deserves. And when she's old enough to understand, tell her that her first father never stopped looking for her." The old man's voice broke on the last words. Marcus finally found his voice, rough and quiet. "Why?" Richard's smile was small and sad and full of something Marcus recognized, love that had nowhere else to go. "Because I lost my own son, and I know what it costs a man to keep breathing after that. You kept breathing for her. That's worth more than anything I ever built." He reached for Marcus's hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Just promise me one thing," Richard whispered. "Love her better than I ever could." Marcus closed his fingers around the old man's hand. For the first time in 10 years, he let the tears fall where someone could see them. "I promise." Richard Hale passed away 4 days later, peacefully, with Marcus sitting quietly in the chair beside his bed. He never got to say a long goodbye to Amara, but he had already said the most important thing by choosing the man who would raise her. Marcus didn't move into the mansion right away. He took Amara to a small house on the edge of the city first, nothing flashy, just enough space for the two of them and the memories they were still learning how to share. He told her about Elena slowly, carefully, with photo albums and stories, and the hospital bracelet she now wore on a chain around her neck. Amara was quiet at first, watchful, but she had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She asked questions. She cried. She let Marcus hold her when the nights were hard. And slowly the space between them filled with something that felt like it had always been there, just waiting. Marcus used part of what Richard had given him to create a foundation for families searching for missing children. He didn't put his name on it. He simply funded the work and occasionally showed up at meetings as someone who understands. He helped other fathers who were where he had been, standing in the rain with nothing but a folder and a promise. The ripple reached further than he could see. A security guard who had once turned him away now volunteered at the foundation on weekends. A nurse who had worked with Richard told the story to her own daughter, who grew up believing that real power sometimes looks like stepping aside. Years later, on a warm evening, Marcus sat on the back steps of that small house with a teenage Amara beside him. She was laughing at a story he had told about her mother trying to cook dinner and setting off every smoke alarm in the building.
The sound of her laughter was the best thing he had ever heard. He looked up at the sky, the same sky that had watched him walk through 10 years of rain and darkness, and felt something settle in his chest that he had almost forgotten how to name. Peace.
If Marcus Reed's story stays with you, let it be for this reason. The world will always try to convince you that some fights are too big, some losses too final, some doors too heavy to knock on. But the truth is quieter and stronger than that. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep showing up. With your folder of proof, your tired eyes, and your unbroken promise, even when every reasonable voice tells you to stop. What part of Marcus's journey stayed with you the most? Was it the years of quiet searching, the moment he almost gave up on that rainy bench, or the hospital room where everything changed? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had someone see the best version of you when you were at your lowest? Or have you been the one who refused to stop looking for someone you loved? Your stories matter here. And if this story reminded you that quiet strength can open doors no amount of money or power ever could, and you want to hear more hidden hero stories like it, I would be grateful if you subscribed. It truly helps these stories find the people who need them most. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Take care of each other out there.